program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board.
Good evening, everyone. We'll call the meeting to order. Ada, can you confirm that we're in compliance with our open meetings laws?
Yes.
Thank you. Will you do a roll call to verify our quorum?
Commissioner Clements?
Present.
Commissioner Harder?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Lyons?
Here.
Commissioner Nordine?
Here.
Commissioner Zur?
Here.
Commissioner Bika? We have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, we'll adjourn to closed session. I would hear a motion to adjourn under Wisconsin Statute 19.851C. We'll be talking about the superintendent evaluation.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned. We intend to re-adjourn in open session at roughly 7 p.m. Thank you. All right, we'll reconvene here in open session. The board took no action during closed session. Those of you who are willing and able, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now move to the adoption of the agenda. If I could hear a motion to approve the agenda for the evening.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The agenda is adopted. We'll next move on to recognition. Our first item is thanking our student representatives. We'll start with Superintendent Johnson. Superintendent Johnson, you may be muted. We're not hearing you if you're speaking.
Thank you.
I'd like to first thank our school board student representatives for their service this school year. Emery and Zoe, when I first was able to meet with you this summer, I don't believe we could have predicted the type of school year that we did have. This year, I've deeply respected your commitment, your service, even under such difficult and trying circumstances, but I really appreciate your ability to connect with your classmates, to share their concerns, issues, and their beliefs. You've provided a significant student voice for us, and we very much appreciate and respect that. I will miss our monthly meetings and conversations, and I wish you all the best next year. Dr. Nordine, would you like to add some comments or recognition for our student representatives?
I'd love to. On behalf of the board, Zoe and Emery, I want to thank you as well for your participation this year. You have challenged us throughout the year. You have shared with us the trials and tribulations and successes that you and your peers have gone through at your various schools, and I think the entire board can say that we feel that you've represented them well. You've challenged us also to think about how we can better use our student representation to inform district work, and we've been having that conversation as a group as we move to our new governance model, and I look forward to how this position will evolve, not only with our new student reps next year, but even tonight, as I'll make sure that as we go through our items that I look to you for comments and questions should you have any. So I want to thank you for that again on behalf of the board. We wish you the best of luck going forward. We hope that this has been an experience that you will take skills and ideas and activism with you into the future. I will personally be in contact with each of you via email. We have a gift for you on behalf of the board and district that I will deliver to you in a way that's convenient for you. So look for that email from me, but I want to thank you again. Just a heartfelt thanks on behalf of the entire board for your work this year. We are very pleased with having you. Thank you for your participation. I understand that each of you, in lieu of a report later on, have maybe something you'd like to say now. So in that, I think it was Emery's night in the rotation to be first for Memorial. Emery, I'll turn it to you first and then to Zoe.
I really just want to echo all the thanks. I have certainly grown as a person working in this position, and I really appreciate the opportunity that I got to work with the board and the opportunities that I got to represent my peers to you all.
Zoe, if you'd like to jump in.
Yeah, I agree with Emery too. I think I've gained a lot of important and valuable lessons while being here. I'm very thankful that I was able to learn about how much time and effort it takes to run the district. Next year, I will be a senior, and although I won't be a member on the board, I will still remain an active member in our district. I will continue to volunteer around the community and in the schools. One of the main reasons I didn't run next year is I was just recently elected my student body president for the graduating class. So that'll take up a lot more time, but I just want to thank you all for the experiences that I've had, and I will carry them with me for a while.
Thank you. And congratulations on your promotion maybe to the student body president. I'm sure it'll be great for you and for the students at North. Our next item is the announcement of the 2021-2022 student representatives. Thank you to the commissioners who participated in the interview and selection process. Thank you especially Commissioner Lyons for your report on the selection. That was helpful. I understand that all of the candidates were very well qualified and that there was a fairly robust discussion on each of them. And that makes me excited as the president for next year to have candidates that we know rose through other great students in our district, and I hope we'll represent them well. So it's my pleasure to announce tonight that our selections for next year have been made. Representing Memorial High School will be Aislinn Berg. Our representative at North High School will be Reed Loken. And our first ever representative from the Eau Claire Virtual School will be Samuel Schmitz. So on behalf of the board, welcome to the three of you. I know that some of you have been participating even this year in student advocacy with the board. I recognize some of your names from emails that I've gotten, and I look forward to you bringing that advocacy to the board and your work with us next year. We welcome you, and we look forward to seeing you starting in September. So thank you. Our next item is the Meadowview Mile, and I'll turn that back over to Superintendent Johnson.
Thank you. I'll take agenda items 5.3, 4, and 5 here. Very brief, but definitely noteworthy. For 5.3, we'd like to recognize Dylan Leonard for organizing the Meadowview Mile event, which took place at Meadowview on Tuesday, May 4th during the school day. All COVID safety protocols were in place. All students and nearly all staff participated in the event. I am disappointed. I'd kind of like to find the finishes if anybody broke a 4 or a 5 minute mile. But I'm sure I can get that information later. Thank you, Mr. Leonard, for organizing that. For 5.4 for transportation, the transportation department, we'd like to recognize Rhonda Tolson for her extra work with setting up transportation to get virtual students to and from schools for access testing schedules on Wednesdays in March and April. It required multiple different routes every week, and she was able to accommodate everyone who requested a ride. Thank you so much to Rhonda. And then 5.5, North Star's Edible Classroom. North Star is very proud to share that plans are moving forward for an edible classroom. This student-centered outdoor garden will begin in the summer of 2021 and continue to grow and expand over the next several years. Ms. Sarah Redford, North Star Special Ed Assistant, Mr. Tim Camlick, North Star Grade 6 teacher, are leading the project. While it's currently an after-school club, the Edible Classroom hopes to impact several general education and special education classrooms When the garden is complete, it will be a fenced-in area of 34 by 34 feet of teaching space and beauty for all to enjoy. We'd like to thank the following community organizations for the grants and funding that we've received so far: Chippewa Valley Growers, Bonnie's Plants, Miracle Grow, North Star PTSA, and North Star Golden Apple Funds. Once again, we're excited to bring this educational, enjoyable, and tasty new learning space to our property for students, staff, and families.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our public forum. However, we do not have any members of the public signed up for public comment tonight, so we will go straight to reports. Our student representatives gave their very brief reports during recognition, so we will then move on to Budget Development Committee and Commissioner Harder.
Thanks. Just a quick one. We did meet last week to mainly to discuss an agenda item for tonight, which is the discussion about the referendum timeline. We'll be talking more about that later. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the superintendent's consent resolution. The board considers approval of both of our consent agendas with one vote and without discussion. If any board member wishes to discuss an item, it will be pulled from the consent agenda. Tonight's items on the consent agenda are the Eau Claire Area School District Library Plan for 2020 to 2023, Financial Report April 2021, 2020-2021 budget adjustments, gifts in the amount of $57,862.13 for the period of April 1st, 2021 through April 30th, 2021, payment of all bills in the amount of $5,373,278.47, and net payroll in the amount of $5,665,509.48 for the period of April 1st, 2021 through April 30th, 2021, Human Resources Employment Report, and Transition Program Construction Bid. At this time, I would hear a motion to approve the superintendent's consent agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Maida, will you please conduct a roll call vote?
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur.
Yes.
We'll now move to the board consent agenda. The only item on the board's consent agenda for tonight is the minutes of our May 3rd, 2021 meeting. I would hear a motion to approve the board's consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Our next item of the agenda is our focus on results section. Tonight we'll be discussing middle school results, strategically using data in an equitable multi-level system of supports. I'll turn it to Superintendent Johnson and his team for this presentation.
Thank you, Chair Nordine. I will just transition right to Executive Director Jim Schmidt.
Good evening. Tonight will be our second collective effort at focusing on results through the board's new coherence governance model. As I mentioned in our last meeting, collecting and reviewing district-wide data through the pandemic has been a challenge, and we will have more rich and current data sets from a district perspective when the school year is over. These second data focus on reported quarter grades for students in grades 6 through 8. I want to remind us all that we are again practicing collective data analysis. We typically, as I mentioned last week or last meeting, triangulate data before making final determinations. Triangulation involves data from at least 3 major sources, and at the middle school, we actually focus on 4, including the STAR, which you saw last meeting for the elementary, the forward exam, classroom common assessments, and grades. So grading at each of our levels is somewhat different. At the elementary level, we use standards-based numerical grades 1, 2, 3, and 4. At the high school, there are quarter letter grades, the traditional A, B, C, F, and S for satisfactory, U for unsatisfactory. But those serve at the high school as a progress check toward the running record of tasks that lead to a semester grade, which is then used for GPA and meeting graduation requirements. At the middle school, however, they use the same letter grades each quarter, but those grades sort of stand alone from other quarter grades. The final semester or year grade, depending on the course, is not a running record like the high school, but a calculation that uses the quarter grade from each, or uses the grade from each quarter. Tonight's presentation will focus on assigned grades over the past 3 years. Michelle Radke, our Director of Assessment, will walk us through the grading data. Michelle Weiber, Principal from DeLong Middle School, Tim Schooley, Principal from North Star Middle School, and Trevor Cola, Principal from South Middle School, will provide school-wide and classroom-based efforts to improve student performance. And finally, just like our last meeting, Becky Graff, our Director of Academic Services, will share curriculum and instructional planning for next year. These plans have been guided again by teacher teams, school visits with teachers and principals, and our student results. So I'm again excited to pass the torch to this outstanding team with Michelle Radke starting us off.
Good evening. I am Michelle Radke, the Director of Assessment for the district. Tonight, I will be communicating the middle school grade data and our findings. When looking at the percentages for each letter grade, these percentages include all of the course grades for all students. The graph communicates the percentage of each letter grade over time. The largest percentage of grades in all terms and years is A's, signified by the blue line. Over the last 2 years, there is a trend of the percentage of A's that starts at a higher percentage in term 1 and ends at a lower percentage in term 3. Except this year, there was a decline from terms 1 to 2, but an increase of 1.3% from term 2 to term 3. The percentage of B's signified by the orange line hovers around 22%. This percentage has stayed consistent over time, with the highest fluctuation throughout the years being 1.2% and only a 0.2% fluctuation during the current year. The percentage of C's signified by the green line hovers around 10%. During the last 2 years, the lowest the percentage of D, signified by the yellow line, was 2.4% and was as high as 4.2%. During the current school year, it increased to 5.7% in term 2 and decreased to 5.5% in term 3. The percentage of F's has been the lowest percentage of grades for the past 2 years. The current school year, there was an increase from approximately 30% in years past to 8.2% in term 1, then increased to 11% in term 2, and then decreased to 10.1% in term 3. For the 2021 school year only, the data was desegregated by cohorts. The very first bar represents the percentage of students in the middle school in each cohort. The other bars communicate the percentage of letter grades for each cohort. The blue sections of the bar graph signify the students who have been a part of cohort A, B, or D. The gray section signifying the students who were taught in cohort C. When looking at the desegregated data, the focus will be on the bookends. The A's make the makeup of the A's and F's. Of the 48.5% of A's students received, 83.7% of these grades were students in cohorts A, B, or D, while 16.3% of these grades were students in cohort C. Of the 10.1% of F's students received in term 3, the percentage of grades from cohort C students increased to 38.9%. This is over double the percentage of A's for cohort C students. When desegregating the data by race, of the 48.5% of A's in term 3 students receive, the largest percentage comes from students who are white, signified by the blue bar. The makeup of the percentage of F's was 10% less than the makeup of A's for students who are white. All other subgroups' makeup of F's was greater than the percentage of A's. Students who are 2 or more, signified by the green bar, had 2.8% more F's, makeup of F's, than the makeup of A's. Hispanics, signified by the yellow bar, 5.9% more. Blacks, signified by the gray bar, 3.1% more. And Asian, signified by the orange bar, 1.4% more. In 1920, the makeup of F's was 9.5% less than the makeup of A's for students who are white and 8.9% less for students who are Asian. All other subgroups, the makeup of F's was a greater percentage than the makeup of A's. Students who are 2 or more had 5.3% more F's than A's, 6.3% for students who are Hispanic and students who are Black. In 1819, the makeup of F's was 10.9% less for students who are white than the makeup of A's and 6.4% less for students who are Asian. All other subgroups, the makeup of Fs was a greater percentage than As. Students who are 2 or more had 3.7% more for the makeup of Fs than As. Black was 6.4% more, and Hispanic 5.6% more. When disaggregating the data by economic status, of the 48.5% of A's students received, the largest percentage came from students who are not economically disadvantaged. Looking at the makeup of F's, there was a 43.1% less F's than A's for students who are not economically disadvantaged. Of the makeup of F's, 68.7% of those F's were represented by students who are economically disadvantaged, when only 38.6% of the students in middle school are economically disadvantaged. We saw a similar trend in 1920 for the makeup of A's through F's. And we saw a similar trend in 1819 for economic status. When the data was disaggregated by special education, of the 48.5% of A's students received, the largest percentage of A's comes from students who are not receiving special education services. The percentage of A's for students who are receiving services is about half of the represented population of 15.2%, as represented on the first bar. When looking at the makeup of F's, 18.5% of the F's are from students who are receiving special education services. This change of 11.2% is the lowest change from A's to F's in the last 3 years. The change from A's to F's for students who are receiving special education services in 1920 was 20.3%, and in 1819 it was 27%. When the data is disaggregated by gender, there is not a trend based on A's to F's, but there is a trend over the last 3 years in which females make up a larger percentage of A's when there is a higher percentage of males in our middle schools, as represented by the first bar. In the last 2 years, when looking at the makeup of D's and F's, there is a higher percentage of males, with 52.2% of males in our middle schools. As signified by the first bar, we saw around a 10% higher representation in the C's, D's, and F's for the past 2 years. And next, I will pass it to the middle school principals to talk through how they use data to help make data-driven decisions this year.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, school board members, and thanks for letting us share a little bit today. Michelle, Tim, and I are going to each touch on one of the 3 subjects we have here from the data that Michelle presented, and also kind of the data that we've taken from the COVID year that we had this year. So with that, I'm here to share briefly some of the systems the middle schools we collectively put in place to help reduce some of our DNF rate throughout the school year and see more student success. As we do each mid-quarter and quarter, we do a data review to try and determine some areas where we can support more students. And this year, especially in the building, we focused on how to do it under the COVID guidelines prior to the April 26th return to 4 days a week. Since starting second semester, we worked with families, teachers, counselors to look at our struggling students and determine which ones could return to school in person for more in-person learning for possible increase of academic performance. This including finding families that also had the comfort level of returning to the building in the COVID year. Each middle school brought back almost all of our students receiving ELs and or special ed services 4 days per week. In addition, we targeted students who were struggling from cohort C to come back to school in a supervised area within the school setting. Some of these students had barriers that were preventing them from being successful, such as language, transportation, supervision, and home supports were barriers that we saw. We also structured our mini times, as some of you know, were part of our middle of our day, where we were able to target interventions specific to reading and math for some of our more struggling students. And then finally, we, as buildings, continued to review and discuss PD around grading and reporting practices with our staff for both in-person and virtual learning classes, as that was a continued learning curve for our staffs as well. So those are some things in the general highlight that we worked on over this year to try and really reduce our DNF as we went into the third quarter. So with that, I'll let Michelle, I appreciate the chance to kind of talk to you a little bit, and I'll let Michelle kind of go into the more of the why and the specifics of what worked.
Hi, good evening. Well, thanks, Trevor. So as we looked at the data, we saw that 70% of our Ds and Fs were happening in our virtual classes. So we looked for ways to connect staff to smaller groups of students in person and get more students in our buildings for more time. Trevor highlighted the subgroups that we focused on, which were our EL, special education, and low SES students. Now what I'd like to do is share why we focused on the groups that we focused on. We focused on those groups of students because we looked at the data and those subgroups had the greatest numbers of Ds and Fs. By bringing our EL and special education students back 4 days a week prior to bringing all students back 4 days a week, those students then had in-person access to a BEA, an SEA, and their EL and or special education teachers. With our EL students, this helped to reduce the language barriers that they were running into during their virtual classes. We noticed that these students wanted to do their classwork and engage in their virtual class, but were stymied by the functional practice of taking an online course. An example is things like how to download a document or sending emails to get help. While our virtual teachers explained those and demonstrated, just that barrier in between kind of made it much more difficult for those students. This compounded and got worse over time and became overwhelming for students, and they began to shut down. By being in person, students were able to have someone help them and walk them through what they needed to do from a practical standpoint. Not only did their grades go up, but engagement and course participation went up dramatically as well. They were now able to do their work and follow along. The in-person access is just so different from virtual, as we all know, and our virtual teachers did everything they could to connect with students. But for these subgroups, the in-person time that we were able to make available just made it much more effective. We also brought students into the building that were in cohort C, and we had them remain in cohort C, but they worked from school. At the middle level, we had built a virtual schedule that allowed staff to know when each student had their class, because every day they had a set schedule that they know that they would log into those classes. So what this allowed for is this allowed for us to hire long-term sub to work with these students and make sure that they were logging in as well as doing their homework and helping them with technology questions. This helped many of our families that needed more adult support for these students. This in-person presence also helped students to stay more engaged in their online courses. We provided structure that they may not have had at home and a consistent way to get to and from school by also giving them access to the school bus. When we started bringing our students back, one of the best things I heard was from one of our EL teachers, and she came up to me and said, "Michelle, this is the best thing that we could have done for our students. It has changed their whole year." So now I'm going to turn it over to Tim Scootley to talk a little bit more about the hidden gems that we found this year.
Good evening, board members and district administrators. This year has been challenging in many ways. Throughout the year, we partnered with our students, families, and staff to find solutions to continue a rigorous and well-designed school experience for students with new health and safety safeguards in place. Along the way, we have identified several hidden gems since last August. These are various new practices that were implemented over the course of the current school year that will move us forward in our mission for DeLong, North Star, and South to be supportive, learning-centered spaces for children in the years ahead. First, our various schedules this year, including mini time and resource time, have been opportunities to offer interventions and work with students in more flexible groups and times. As we plan for next fall, our schools will have resource and other periods of time when teachers and students can connect on the work that is most pertinent to their situation. We are building master schedules in a way that offers time for students and teachers to work together on EL, SPED, and intervention goals in addition to other curricular areas. Second, we plan to integrate programs that support students who may need an additional opportunity at school. Examples include the Acres of Joy Ranch program, which was recently brought to the board as a LEAP proposal to help students build positive self-esteem and school relationships moving forward. B, UWEC's Blue Gold Beginnings will be mentoring our students in all 3 schools next year through their Black Student Excellence program, focusing on academic success, building a sense of community, and reflecting diversity in the adults within our schools. And C, we believe a new social emotional learning program is going to begin implementation in our K-12 program next fall. The SEL program, alongside Avid Learning and Implementation, will give students and adults a chance to connect and teach the skills that students need in order to continue their success as they progress through the schools. Third and finally, the professional development of our staff in the area of technology integration has been off the charts this year. This supports students really in two ways. First, their virtual class learning this year, Canvas, our learning management system, is now a tool that is well traveled by all students and staff. Canvas has many possibilities to differentiate class material for students. Second, Microsoft Teams, our virtual video meeting platform, will make district-wide horizontal and vertical collaboration more effective among teachers and staff. While Trevor, Michelle, and I are rarely in the same room, we collaborate multiple times each week. Our district teachers are no different. The work of our district PLC teams became more efficient this year via Microsoft Teams. Instead of battling the parking lot at 3 o'clock in an effort to travel to other district buildings after school, or waiting until district-wide PD days, our teachers are chatting, conferencing, and calling much more often with their same subject teams. This leads to a more aligned educational experience, a consistent sharing of positive lessons and classroom challenges, and embedded PD for our staff PLC teams. So to summarize, we have taken the time to discuss the hidden gems of our current school year and welcome the work ahead to make them part of our permanent school improvement efforts. These include an increased flexibility of resource time to support students, the addition of several student programs, and the efficient and effective use of technology to improve our instruction and collaboration. Thank you for your time, school board, and now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Ms. Becky Graff.
Thank you to our middle school principals. I'm Becky Graff, the Director of Academic Services, and as I shared during our last meeting, our systemic goals to improve achievement center on helping all our teachers improve their preparation, their teaching, and their ability to reflect and adjust instruction. Several of the specific strategies that were shared by the principals will be extremely important, and we will be able to hone in on those as part of this work. Collaboration around the instructional framework helps our middle school teachers calibrate their work, ensuring teachers are reaching grade level rigor in their classes and reaching common learning targets. Our teacher leaders play an important role moving forward. Collaboration and professional learning is central to making improvements in achievement. Colleagues analyze student data and dig deep beneath the surface to understand the root causes of learning challenges that different groups of students are having, and they plan how to address those issues in their instruction. The 4 types of teacher teams listed here interact to change our trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I will open the floor to comments or questions from board members. I'll remind my colleagues that are virtual, please physically raise your hand so it's easier for me to see that you're wanting to be recognized. Commissioner Clements.
Thank you, President Nordine. So early in the presentation, you provided data over the past few years regarding achievement, at least as measured through their course grades, by several factors, including their demographic background, the income experience by their household. What work is done to try to disaggregate that, to try to figure out which ones of these seem to be more determinant than others in terms of at least in terms of how we're measuring their academic progress?
So we are, and in some of your appendix data, we're doing some work with taking and looking at our race with our economically disadvantaged. And you'll notice, like on that one, we notice that it is not about race. It really is about being economic disadvantaged. So looking at different combinations and doing some statistical analysis on our data that we have to start to get to really to the root cause of what is happening and why it's happening.
Thank you. I'll check out the report further.
Okay.
And just a follow-up on a question that Josh was asking, the economic disadvantage definition, is that free and reduced lunch?
That is free and reduced lunch, correct.
Thank you.
And those are the terms. Oh, sorry. Economically disadvantaged and not economically disadvantaged are terms that the state uses, and they use the same data of our free and reduced numbers.
My comment was just going to be that, the slides, some students obviously intersected multiple slides in graphs, and that's just something, so the question that kind of, for both of you is just that becomes a challenge, because that's where we even start looking at students. We can't look at individual students for economically disadvantaged, because that's not allowed. We can only look at aggregate numbers that do not identify students, but trying to find the intersectionality of the different data sets is a bit of a challenge. I mean, it's trying to figure out what is the core, but we generally see poverty being a big driver.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Johnson, I believe you had your hand up just a moment ago. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, that's fine. I guess for me, and the continuous effort to go back to these to these slides about this focus on improving collaboration, I continue to ask and would like, as you kind of try to further make sense of this data, which one of these collaborative models are the most effective, and is it quite possible that some of these collaborative models that you're having everyone go through probably aligns more with the makeup of the teachers in the particular school, and then will have a better impact on the student learning outcomes? From the data that was supported, I just, once again, I think a little bit troubled. You go back 3 years, and actually we see no change. So it's not it's not a pandemic related. So then, therefore, potentially you could talk about the intersectionality pieces, but really, do we have data? Or are we asking the right questions that kind of tells us kind of which of those collaborative models are potentially are the most effective in terms of actually impacting student learning outcomes? And that's kind of one of the things that, as we move forward, I would encourage all groups if we could kind of add that. Thank you.
So I did share this first slide because you're right, things have been level, but we actually did see disruption this last year. So that is different. It has, while it was steady, it was. So yes, we do have to reverse things, but also improve in the other direction. My second question, when you talk about collaborative models, are you referring to the conversations from the principals?
No, the last slide there, when there's focus on improving collaboration, so trying to all these teams and instructional coaches, which of these, or we're just saying we're doing all of these? Do we know which of these is the most impactful? Like from this last slide, do we have any idea that? Are you saying if all of these are actually meeting a mark, change student learning outcomes, where's the data to say that they are? I'm curious.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the professional learning communities, we've done a lot of work in the district in the past. And that is a school-based team that meets. And what I would say is that we've got varying levels of effectiveness of those teams. So there's room to improve them, to make them more efficient. I would also say that they work in conjunction with each other. They have different roles and responsibilities. So the essential learning overview teams, those were started with the pandemic. We didn't have that type of team before. And the feedback that we're getting from teachers is incredibly positive, because they're able to speak horizontally. So there's a grade level representative from every elementary school, and at our secondary level, they collaborate and they're able to decide what's most essential, because we don't have the ability to teach everything in a pandemic, but they're coming to the decisions of what's most important and able to narrow the focus. I think that horizontal planning has been extremely important to make sure that we're on the same page. And as Jim and I have visited classrooms, we're seeing common language, we're seeing common from our teachers and from our students in how they're responding and the conversations that they're having. And I think that this work moving forward is going to be even more important next year, because we know that our students have varying abilities in terms of what they experienced this past year. So having those teams be able to continue to meet and say, you know, we're seeing this group of students struggle. How did you address those instructional strategies, and being able to determine how fast can we go? How do we move some students forward? So that Essential Learning Overview Team is a new process. We don't have long-term data on that. Our content leadership teams are the teams that set our rigor level, and that's a vertical alignment. They're the ones that help with textbook adoption and resource adoption. Those have been in existence for quite a while, and we need that work to continue to calibrate again how they inform the work of the essential learning teams. And then our instructional coaches are, we're also really tightening up how we're going to be using the coaches this next year. And if you're interested, I can share data at another presentation about the process that we're using with them to help improve the PLCs at the school level.
We'll go Commissioner Lyons and then over to you, Commissioner Zer.
I jotted this comment down, and I want to make sure that I heard it correctly. 70% of the failing grades were in virtual classes, and is that just singular virtual classes, or are those the hybrid classes? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, and that was all virtual classes. So and that could have been then where it might have been like one student had potentially one F, or you could have had another student that had maybe 5 Fs. So it was like kind of all of the Fs and Ds combined. But it was for cohort C as well as the virtual classes, the virtual encore classes as well. All of those were combined.
So, in a clarification, a student who is in cohort A, B, and D still had virtual classes throughout the year. So they could still be in those cohorts. So this graph would not signify that 75%, that 70%. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Zer.
So one of the things that I think as we move along in this process, and I think that we got to this at the end of our last meeting, was about we have data, right? You guys have it, and I maybe mistakenly asked Jim to bring it or something, and I did, but anyway, the thing that I think would be most effective, and I'm speaking for myself, but also I heard some feedback from my colleagues that they're not educators, and they can't really comprehend this kind of world that some of us live in. And I think that what would be really helpful would be to hear, you guys are the experts. You are the people who are on the ground every day, and we're here to say, here's what we want our students to be. Here is where we want to be as a district. And you are our people. You're our people who are going to get us there. You're people going to get us over the finish line. And I think that what I would like to hear as a board member is what do you think about this? What are your big positives? What are your big concerns? Where is your brain right now saying, I want to watch this? Like, this is something that I need to be paying attention to, because that really is going to be impactful for me, because I can pour over this, and I will be honest, it blurs together at a certain point. And even though I like it and I try to figure it out like a puzzle, I don't actually know what any of it really means in context. So one of you, two of you, give me your positives, your concerns, and what you're really watching right now. I'd like to know that.
Commissioner Zur, it's Tim Scootley over at North Star. Was your question directed at the three principals, or was it directed at the executive team?
I have no idea. That's a really good question, Tim. I am just happy for the people who are super sharp to give me some context.
I can answer from my end as I look at the data in many different ways. Economically disadvantaged really always surfaces to the top. And so looking at, what are the strategies that we are going to work collaboratively to meet the needs of those students, and what are going to be our indicators to see if we are meeting the needs of those students. That may not happen overnight. And so we have to have what is the progress monitoring that is going to happen over time for us to move that mark with those students.
I'll share a couple of things. Just anecdotally, I think that the couple of hidden gems that Tim talked about, we'll go back to the collaboration piece first. The communication, the collaboration between the schools has been remarkable this year in terms of other barriers in the past. And I think with some of our subgroups that change schools quite often, that it should be over the next couple of years easier to transition in and out of schools, because our teachers are on much more of a succinct, they're going to talk regularly. The teams and the meetings have really created an opportunity, the ELOs, to stay pretty much tighter than maybe in the past, where we were in the same ballpark, but now we might be in the same inning type of thing. So that I think is a positive that really came out of there, is we have several students that might start at the Long and then finish at South, and then maybe they went to North Star and then they go to, and so I think that's a consistency piece. I'm excited. We incorporated two new a math curriculum and an ELA curriculum that I think our teachers did very well with, but had to incorporate in a pandemic, and then moving into next year, a second year of being able to really flourish and grow. And I know that the two bigger middle schools are going to we'll have a block schedule, so we have some time to really dive into that, and then that will only impact, and all three schools going to Avid. So I think there's some things that we see that are going to help with those specific commissioners there. And I don't know if that answered your question, but those are some things where, like, what can we specifically take from this year and target next year on students that maybe struggled at the end of the year? How can we move those forward at the same time, continuing to push our other students? So I think there's multiple things that we're looking at that we're excited about, but at the same time, I think people are pretty exhausted. So to really try and pump teachers up right now to talk about that, it might be a little bit into June and July. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, or Tim or Michelle, if you want to.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to add is I think that is a really good question. And one of the things that I think has been very positive about this year is that as we look forward, and I don't want this to sound bad, but I think in the past, when we were kind of like, this is the way we do things, it's very easy for us to say, well, this is the way we do things, and I'm not sure how we can make a difference because, we keep trying this. But this year, what it did, good or bad, has forced us to really look at how do we do things different, because we had to. And so what that's done is it's really opened up the conversations for moving forward. Oh, we can do things different. which as we move forward, and Trevor talked a little bit about with Sultan DeLong looking at a different type of schedule, staff are now saying, okay, how can we do this different? When we work with our special education teachers and we're working on the schedule for next year, they're like, oh, but we could do this different. And how can we do this different so that we can target these kids that maybe were struggling before? So I think if there's one thing that I would take from this, and by looking at the data, is you know, as we can see, some of it hasn't changed and it's maintained the same. As this year has really opened our eyes and kind of said, no, we really can do things different because look at what we've done. And we're starting to move that direction next year to say what's been good, we're going to keep this, and what do we need to shift because we aren't seeing some changes in this data. That would be like one of the big positives that I would say that I'm excited about moving forward to next year.
I think Michelle just said it very, very well. And I would just add that right now, one thing that I think is successful is kids are in these buildings 4 days a week. And when you walk out of my office, you hear kids singing or playing their instrument and balls bouncing in the gym and art being created. And so it just has that vibrancy of a school back. And then I think one thing that I look at is next fall, how do you serve all students and all families well? Knowing that students may, leave the school on June 3rd, 2021 and come back in the fall. And then there's other students that left the school March 16th, 2019 and are coming back in the fall. So I think there's a widespread, which with it comes a number of needs and dynamics that we haven't seen before. So we're going to be working to land students and support kids and make them comfortable in a school, whether it's been just a few months of a summer break as typical, or whether it's been a longer time since we've seen them last.
I'd like to piggyback off of something Tim said earlier when he talked about the technology and bringing teams together very quickly across the district. As Becky and I have visited classrooms in each building, I've been amazed at the common language that I'd never heard before. So one of the challenges, though, that in front of us, as Becky mentioned, is really those vertical teams. So that's that horizontal teaming that she was talking about. It's those vertical teams and really calibrating the level of rigor. We did have some of these teams in place before, but it was very difficult to bring those teams together without being disruptive to the educational process. And as Tim mentioned, we have tools now that allow for that to take place in a much more seamless way that was not available to us before the pandemic, one of those gems. So I'm extremely, while some data do concern me, I'm also extremely encouraged because, as Michelle was talking about, some of those indicators that we're looking for adult behavior that hopefully will then translate as a lagging indicator with our student behavior. Some of those things are beginning to line up very nicely, and our teachers are appreciative of that common language because they feel like they're not doing things in isolation. Someone once told us, you can't have a vertically and horizontally articulated program and do your own thing. You can bring your own flavor to it, but you can't be doing something significantly different. And I feel we are tighter than ever before. We have still room to grow and calibration still to get done, but we're on a trajectory that is very different than I've seen in the past. The final thing that I think is a big deal is the fact that the board is spending time talking about this. Where you spend your time matters. And when our staff realize that the board is paying attention to student performance data and student soon we'll be sharing later this summer perception data and other data sets from those different domains I talked about last meeting. That sends a clear message that this matters and that people are paying, because what you report and what you spend your time on is what people will value. And so I just want to applaud the board for the coherence governance direction, because that just raises the level of attention to this. And I think is really, I know from a leadership perspective, helps with our work quite a bit.
If I could add one thing to what Jim was saying too, to kind of summarize, when I look at this data and I look at it with a continuous improvement lens, and that the continuous improvement happens in small increments. It doesn't happen in a giant move overnight. But I compare this data to our EMLSS framework. And so I look at this and I say, what are the small things we could do with curriculum? What are the small next steps that we could take with progress monitoring? What are the small next steps that we could take with our balanced assessment system? What are the small next steps that we could take with high quality instruction. And when we start continually thinking about how are we going to improve in each one of those areas, that's how we're going to turn the dial long term. And our data shows us what we might do differently in any one of those categories. And so we can have a multi-pronged approach to raise our student learning.
So we're just about out of our budgeted time on this. I do want to make sure that I ask Representatives Toole and Wolf if they had a comment or a question as part of our ongoing evolution of the student representative. So if either of you would like to jump in, if you have a comment or a question, that would be a great time to get it in now. There's plenty of times where we don't have to have a question. So we'll move on to our next item, which is matters reserved for board action. We only have one item tonight, that is the appointment of school board committee and liaison assignments. I sent out a request to board members for their interest on the various committees and liaisons that we are assigning. I was able to find folks to fill in all of those. I did conscript Commissioner Clements into the alternate for the delegate, but he didn't write me and say that he refused. So I think we made it. All we have to do now is just approve these as a board, since I can't do it all by myself. So I would hear a motion to approve the appointment of the school board committees and liaisons for the next year.
So moved.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Tonight we have a board development section regarding the referendum that we have been considering for the past many months. I have asked Superintendent Johnson and Abby Johnson to talk a little bit from the administrative side about our timeline and the process that we might need and a recommendation for when to do this. I also asked Commissioner Harder and the Budget Development Committee to present briefly on how they see that work through this next year. And then we'll have an open time for discussion as a group. We'll hold it at that point just like a work session where you just jump in whether or not you have been recognized. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Superintendent Johnson and to Abby for the first part.
Thank you again, Chairman Nordine. In this discussion, to provide some historical perspective to the presentation, I utilized assistance from Maida Miskey and Patty Iverson regarding the 2016 successful referendum in the district. And I wanted to include that 2016 information, as so many of you as board members had not been sitting board members at that time. When there was discussion of a new referendum in the fall of 2019, Dr. Hardebeck and Maida Miskey had examined the 2016 timeline and updated that to reflect possibilities for an upcoming campaign. After the timeline and tasks were approved or adopted in February of 2020, COVID had soon begun, and the next time the board discussed this timeline was September of 2020. This narrative and our corresponding documents provide valuable context regarding our 2022 referendum and our newly adjusted timeline for it. And after a preliminary discussion with Commissioners Harder, Bika, and Nordine, followed by further discussion amongst the executive team, our administration has determined that it would be in the district's best interest to adjust our timeline for referendum to November of 2022. And our rationale is as follows. In reviewing our timeline throughout the winter and spring, we knew that we would face significant challenges to meet deadlines from our alterations back in September of 2020. Secondly, staff energy has been focused on instruction and student needs with COVID this year. We've switched instructional models for 3 levels since February, and we're still dedicating immense time in preparing for next year's school year. This work requires tremendous focus from many employees and specific groups in our organization, We simply do not have this present ability for a successful campaign on the present or the past timeline. And finally, our financial situation and student enrollment needs further clarity before we begin our preparations and presentations. While our finance and enrollment departments have projections in preparation for next year, they're not true students in the seats at this point. This will form in the upcoming months, obviously. So Executive Director Johnson and I met last week to complete our presentation to the Budget Development Committee on May 12th, and this provided us an opportunity to inform the committee of those changes. Furthermore, it assists Commissioner Harder this evening in sharing his components on future Budget Development Committee and full board involvement. So right now I'd like to transition in sharing critical components of the timeline for 2022 is Executive Director of Finance, Abby Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. So on this screen, we have the past calendar from 2016 referendum and the November 2022 proposed calendar. I'm not going to pull those up, but I wanted you to know as board members, if you looked at those, you'll notice that the November 2016 timeline is very similar to the November 2022 timeline. In fact, the election date is the same in both of those years. On the November 2022 calendar, you'll see things highlighted in green. And that was the things that we talked about with budget development last week as places that budget development could assist and then ultimately would have some board discussions as well. So on our next screen, we made the green a little bit in an easier format to read. And so these are the highlighted dates that we talked about in budget development last week. So as you know, right now, we're currently budget planning for the next school year. And coming up again, the board will be hearing some more information about a capital referendum. You know, there's been some recommendations already to the board regarding elementary schools, and the secondary work is ongoing right now. So we anticipate some additional information coming to the board before October this fall. In September of 2021, we anticipate the board looking at Budget Development Committee's calendar to review and discuss the referendum needs and planning. Also in September, probably some discussion along with the board about potential questions and types of questions. Now, this would not be the actual question on the ballot. It would be more about capital versus operating, recurring versus non-recurring, etc. That discussion in September would help budget development gain some feedback and what is some of the information that the board would like to review. And we anticipate that happening in December of 2021. In January and February of 2022, we expect there would be some board discussion about next steps, timeline, and then potentially approving the timeline for the referendum, reviewing what is approved, later this year. And then finally, we would anticipate that there would be a survey and the results would be compiled, and budget development would make the final recommendation for a question or multiple questions based upon what we've learned from the board. One thing that is important for the board to remember is that construction, if we had an April referendum, a November referendum, the construction would still take place at the same time. If the referendum, and it was capital, was approved in April, we would still need to go to bid and get all of the plans and contractors on board. And there just isn't enough time to get a whole lot of significant construction done when we wouldn't be able to go out to bid until late April, early May. And so the construction timeline we anticipate would look the same, and that would be starting in the summer of 2023. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Harder to talk about some statutory deadlines.
Oh, thanks, Abby. So, this is kind of, as you saw, as Abby sort of pointed out, the real work of the referendum planning culminates in determining the question that we're going to put on the referendum, and things like how much money and for what purpose. That's what this first item is about, and you can see it's not for a little while based on this calendar, but we would actually these are the places where the full board is we're going to be asked to weigh in based on the current plan. And this first one is really taking a look at those questions, and there are different categories of questions, as it mentions here. Whether it's capital for building projects or operating to help pay for often people costs or other costs, recurring, non-recurring, things like that. And we will ask the full board to weigh in on the recommendations that come from staff and will come probably through budget development. Very important point there. And then in the following 2 months, we will look at the timeline and just confirm that everything is a go. And then through the summer, at the end of that summer in 2022, we would finalize those questions and certify them. And then this is just an annual thing, October 2022, the budget adoption, which of course the board always votes on as well. So then November 2022, the all-important election, the referendum date, and I think, as Abby pointed out, the construction date. So this is places where board will get involved. And we talked a lot about this in the last budget development meeting. Is there are really only a couple of key decisions here that the board actually votes on, but and a couple places where we're checking in with the board to that staff will be checking in with the board to make sure that this seems to be on the right track. We talked about the value, and really this was certainly my intention, and I as we talked about it in budget development, is to make sure that to the degree budget development is involved in this, it's at places that make sense for our executive team, for our superintendent, our executive team. And so these, Abby, if you maybe will step back one slide to those points where we talk about where budget development will get involved and how they get involved. This is it really, and these are really our recommendations that came from our executive team and superintendent. So, and what we talked about in budget development is we're certainly my perspective on it is I'm happy to have these deeper discussions that our executive team has said they value in whatever format makes sense. Now, our default expectation is it'll be just sort of budget development as has happened in the past. Happy to do it that way, but we've also talked about other ways of doing it, whether it's work sessions with the full board. Maybe we pull out a couple of these key points and we can have larger work sessions. Of course, any board member is invited to join budget development, or we talk about doing something that's completely separate. But as I said, right now our working assumption is we'll do it with budget development. I wanted to open that up though as a point that hey, if there's any concerns about that, especially if we're looking at our new governance model, how we structure that is certainly open for discussion as far as I'm concerned. I think that covers what I had. Abby, Mike, I hand it back to you.
Thank you. I think that was the end of our presentation, so it's now really just an opportunity for discussion amongst the board members.
So the focus of our discussion should probably be among the board members, because this, while it will be a great deal of work, of course, for the district, it will also be something that we sort of need to commit to as a group. We don't necessarily have to take official board action at this moment, but if we're not in generalized agreement that we need to work on this, because this, outside, I think, of the few points that the board needs to meet and actually make a vote, we will have a large role as community members, and this will test some of our upcoming communication plan to be able to communicate ideas and facts and talk with people about this. We'll have a large role in that. So certainly we can ask questions of Abby or the rest of the team, but I just wanted to have a chance to converse amongst ourselves to say, the recommendation is to aim for this for November. How does that sound? And how do we want to approach it? So I'll just open it up. Anybody can jump in. So go ahead. Just go ahead, Dr. Johnson, you can just go ahead. We'll run this kind of like our work session where we'll just try to have it more open. So go ahead.
Yeah, I guess for me moving forward, and I appreciate the work of the other entities that were going on, but I don't know how many of you decide to open up that Wisconsin Association of School Boards, the Wisconsin School News, but they're running a series given the lower percentage rate of the referendums that were just that weren't passed this past year, but it's the top 3 referendum mistakes, and they're putting it from 3 different perspectives: architecture, community members, and then kind of from a school district, school board perspective. So I guess for me, someone who has not had any experience with this as a board member, I'm going to be using that as somewhat of a framework in moving forward. And I guess my expectations and or my questions would be if in the outline or the calendar that was provided to us in this particular presentation, if there's some integral pieces, because what's interesting here is, it was that comment that Abby made about, contractors and everything. In that first issue, in this first kind of series, they were saying that you could make it work with timelines if individuals were included at the very beginning. But then that actually if you make a decision earlier on of whether or not this is going to be capital, then actually those individuals who are going to be that we're going to rely on to get bids should actually be a part of this particular process. But in this series, I would just recommend if you never read it, there's some pretty good stuff here. But that Wisconsin Association of School Board, the Wisconsin School News, the 3-part series, top 3 referendum mistakes from the architecture perspective. And I guess the other thing I would ask, and I'm not sure if this is a budget development piece and or it would be the executive team, but if we could, given that high percentage of referendums that actually were not passed this year, could we just get a breakdown in terms of kind of what were those parameters within those referendum, that the questions and or kind of was it capital more so than could we get could someone do some legwork there and get us a breakdown there? So because I know strategically and this is just because of my personal relationship to family, our in-laws and stuff in Wausau. It was complete debacle with the referendum, not only the questions, but kind of the lack of actually community engagement in it. And what I really liked in this 3-part series, they begin really talking about that piece about community engagement beyond actually employees and families, but also those community members who have no stake in the game as it relates to participating in the process. And so that's my only contribution. Thank you.
Dr. Johnson, I wonder do you remember which issue of the Wisconsin School News that was in? I'm sure if you could forward it to the board or whatever, just so we could link into it. That would be great.
I'll pull the link. It was from the May issue, but I'll pull the link and then I'll just send it out to everyone that way. So thank you.
That would be great. Thank you. I just want to piggyback on that and say, during the 2016 election, I don't even know, Commissioner Harder, were you on the board at all for that referendum?
Yeah, I had an appointment in June of that year, and I was sort of lightly present. Yes, at least lightly present.
I know in conversations with Chris Hambuck Boyle just how much work went into that referendum. They even had a documentary made called Road to Referendum that talked about theirs. So that might be another, if there's a link to that we could get. Abby, you're nodding, so maybe that means you can send it to us. And I know, as I've been talking with Chris Hambuck Boyle over the tenure of my time on the board, like she's always got a lot of ideas for that. That's linking back to the success that the community had. And it may, there may be things that we could avoid this time that made it, but certainly last time we were successful. So that's another resource for board members, since outside of you, Commissioner Harder, I don't think anyone has personal experience as a school board member going through a referendum. So that would be helpful.
Commissioner Nordin, can I ask a question?
Of course.
So Commissioner Johnson, I heard you want some more information about the parameters and the questions. Are you looking at specifically the spring referendum? So this one in April of 2021.
Yeah, if you could, because that was as I continue to follow the information from the various public education networks, when it pointed out that actually we saw a dramatic decrease in referendums that were accepted this past April. And so for me, if we could just using that, essentially, since that actually set the wrong trend in terms of referendums passing in Wisconsin, if we could use just this April and that the multitude of referendums that were, and I know WASP has it on its site. There's a couple other places. If we could just use that as like a barometer and kind of see kind of where it was. So it's this past April, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think I have a document that I can share that even has some graphs as well, that put it in a little bit of different light. I just wanted to make sure we were talking about you. Thank you.
So Commissioner Harder, Commissioner Lyons, Dr. Beek is not with us tonight, but I'm personally very happy to have budget development sort of spearhead this. I don't know if your feelings as those committee members, because it really will take a level of leadership to sort of organize and facilitate the board's participation. I mean, I would envision, and this is maybe just my perception of, us needing to attend events to share about the referendum and answer questions, but also to promote the referendum as the campaign comes up, and that will take some facilitation. Is that so? I'm personally fine with it, but I want to make sure that the members of budget development are also fine taking on that leadership role of this particular project over the next, really 18 months.
Yeah, I that certainly was the tenor of the conversation last week, that, we're happy to carry on with it but by the same token, also happy to talk about other possibilities if there's an interest from the board, but glad to take on that responsibility over the coming year. I think we agreed it made sense, and I think Commissioner Beekin had said at one point, maybe the Budget Development Committee just becomes the referendum committee, and but I think we saw that perhaps there were some other things that budget would be involved in too, lingering things, whatever they may be. It certainly would be my interest as a member of this committee to continue thinking very deeply about what role it should best play in our new governance model that we have in the district, and evolving towards being optimal in that regard, whether that means eliminating the committee entirely or whatever it may mean, but continuing to think hard about that.
And I was actually going to quote Commissioner Beek as well, Commissioner Harder. She did say during the course of the conversation that perhaps the Budget Development Committee does become the referendum committee. And I think that there is a level of planning and detail that gets a bit outside of the charge of budget development, but still focuses on those things that budget development has been talking about all up until the time where we put forward this presentation that Commissioner Harder reviewed tonight. So yeah, I think that this could be a great transition for the committee.
Yeah, just jump in, Commissioner there.
Oh, sorry, you already said that.
No problem.
Just a plug. Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking naturally about communication. Imagine that. But I think just a reminder to my fellow commissioners that there is that survey out there about communication, specifically that alignment to our calendar. The discussion we started last time. But sort of who are we going to talk to and when are we going to talk to those people? And I think all of those people that we're going to identify and that we're going to start networking with more intentionally as a board, they're going to be, and I think I'm going to go back to what Commissioner Johnson said about how important it is to have these people at the table from the start. Not, hey, here's what we're doing. We just talked about how we don't want to do that anymore. Of like, hey, we made all the decisions, now get on board. You know what I mean? So I think we have to make sure that communication piece is active and going. And I know that it's got to ramp up. I know it's going to take time, but so just a reminder to fill out your survey. That's all I'm going to say.
Thanks. I did look up the referendum mistakes from the architect's perspective here in the interim. And number 3 on just that first page is failing to engage the entire district. And I think that's what you're talking about, Commissioner Zura. So you've also taken away my plug for the end of the night. I was going to remind everybody. So thank you for reminding us to get that survey done. And I also need to get it done. So I won't pretend that somehow I'm ahead of the curve on it. Yes, hearing no real objections, I'm glad about that. I know 3 of us that are on the board right now were formerly members of the Demographic Trends and Facilities Planning Commission, and I imagine all 3 of us happen to feel a real sense of urgency about the need for a referendum to, especially on the capital side, because we have building needs beyond the dire needs of just Roosevelt and South, but our growing district. And while obviously we have a few hundred fewer students registered this year, largely due to COVID, that's not going to buy us too much time in terms of, those students are going to come back home and our elementary schools continue to grow. So I understand the need to move it to November. I understand that that's going to allow the district to get off to a better start for next year and focus on coming back stronger than ever and making the changes that the board is demanding for student results and equity across the board. But it seems pretty solid to me that the board is ready to take on this work, and I'm glad because, as I said, I feel that urgency on the capital side, and I think we have some operational things that we also could go to the community for. But that'll be the development process going forward. So unless there are any other comments, we can run a little bit ahead on this part and move on. But if anybody wants to jump in, especially Commissioner Clements, I know you haven't had an opportunity, or if our student reps, if you have thoughts on a referendum, I'd welcome your comments as well.
Well, if our student reps aren't going to jump in, I'll just say that it's an excellent opportunity to be able to engage the community in ways that we haven't done or haven't done well, and with a very specific tool in mind, that being the referendum, in a way to make sure that we connect what is it that we want to do as